Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next edition of AmiSights. I'm Ami Kassar, your host, along with my co-host, Richard Walton, founder and CEO of Outsell. And Richard and I share a couple things. And well, I screwed all that up, guys. Sorry, repeat. You're not my co-host, you're my host. Okay,
I
start.
know. I was going to say, wow, I've never been called a co-host before. What's going to happen? Who's the secret guest?
All right. You didn't even catch me, Tony. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next edition of AmiSights. I'm Ami Kassar, your host. Unfortunately, my co-host Lynn Ozer, aka SBA Queen, is not here today, but we're all good. We have an amazing guest, Richard Walton. Richard Walton is the founder and CEO of Outsell. He and we share a couple things in common. First of all, I am originally from Cape Town, South Africa. Not everyone knows that about me. That's where Richard lives today.
I did not know. I did not know that about you. We're going to have to.
There you go, buddy. You learn stuff every day. Yes, my accent's going to come back now. And secondly, Richard and I are deeply involved in the EO Entrepreneurs Organization group. I got to know Richard in an initiative I'm involved in called EO Grit, which is a small little WhatsApp group, about 650 people now, where people are working in the trying to get their businesses better in a tough economy. And there was this massive demand for this guy called Richard Walton from Cape Town to come and help people with some B2B sales stuff. And that's how I learned about Richard, and he did, and he blew the audience away. And so, Richard, welcome to the show. Now we know everything we have in common. So,
well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I didn't know you were from Cape Town originally.
I was born in Cape Town in 1969 and moved. We lived in Oranjestad. Moved in 1977, shortly after the Soweto riots, with my family to the States.
Okay. Do you still have any family here?
Some, but most have left. So.
Yeah. So. I assume you've been back every now and again?
I came back for the first time in like 35 or so years for GLC 2 years ago. And I brought my wife back with me, and she had never gone, and it was a phenomenal trip.
Yeah, it's a special place. I moved here from the UK 11 years ago. I'm, as I said, originally from the UK. I still go back there a lot. My wife's actually from Boston, Massachusetts, East Coast. So we're actually coming that way in a couple of weeks' time. So we spend a few months there a year as well. But Cape Town is a lovely place to live. Very, very happy.
Really made me wonder why we left. I mean, I know why we left. I think if I had a young family back in Cape Town in 76, 77, I would have probably considered leaving too if I could have.
Yes.
But it is in so many ways God's country. So it's really a magnificent place. And I went there on the Friday night that I was there to the synagogue there called the Garden Synagogue. And I sat in my grandfather's seat with his name on it.
Oh, wow.
That was
that must have been very special.
Very spiritual kind of experience. So good.
Wow.
Richard, what do you do?
What do I do? So
besides EO.
Yeah, well, again, we can go down that rabbit hole. I think we were just chatting before we went live about how once you've fallen in love with the organization, it's intoxicating. It's addictive. So my second job outside of EO is called Outsell, and it's interesting that you said, "What do I do?" Because actually, I was interviewing someone earlier. Really impressive CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, 30 years of experience, B2B, worked for companies like Netflix, Skype, smaller companies as well, funded startups, but they were very intrigued about our model. And I found that very intriguing because I never thought it was actually that unique. But essentially, we're a B2B marketing and sales agency, but we're a sales-led marketing agency. So kind of my background is sales. And when you talk about B2B marketing, it's a very gray area about what is marketing and what is sales. So I prefer to lead with a sales focus when it comes to those activities. But essentially what we do is we empower networks. So most of our clients are founder-led, between 1 and 10 million US revenue. And they're selling high ticket items, so average contract value above $25,000. And what that essentially means is that traditional B2B tactics are either don't work or they're out of budget for the types of clients that we work with. So so therefore, if you're selling high ticket items, chances are that the volume is low. So SEO, performance advertising isn't going to make sense. Unless you can afford, PR and high level branding activities, which when you're kind of, sitting at 3 to 7 million US dollars, again, is probably out of your reach. So you need to use different tactics, and those tactics we have found it's all about network expansion. So what we do is we work very closely, mostly with founders, to look at how they built their business, because this is how most of them have built their business. I'm guessing that's probably how you built your business, is through your networks and things like that. And how can we take that and how can we essentially scale that and take the weight off the founder's hands? And so we do a whole bunch of things, from developing a go-to-market strategy, to understanding what the strengths and weaknesses are of our clients, to maybe it's podcasting, it's producing white papers, it's putting them on stage as speakers, it's allowing them to host summits or webinars. Effectively, what is going to allow them to get engaged with people offline and online. But I'm a massive fan and a big believer in traditional marketing activities, kind of offline marketing activities. And you mentioned earlier that I gave a talk to the Brit group that you put together, and you kindly said it was well received. And I believe I started off the talk by showing a slide of a golf course with a cup of coffee, and then there was an arrow that pointed to LinkedIn and AI and things like that. And the how I normally start my talks is, we've missed something. The traditional marketing back in the 80s was all about meeting people, shaking people's hands. And then somehow we got lazy, and, technology made us lazy, and we started adopting tactics like, LinkedIn and cold email and drip campaigns, which has its place, but less and less so, and particularly for the types of clients that we service. So I help our clients go back to the 80s, and I help them embrace more traditional marketing activities and to use technology to be very successful as that. Make sense?
It totally makes sense. Do you think it's fair to say that, we're in the B2B space, and people say to me, we're pretty successful. I think we've been successful at building a good brand and authority and a good sort of referral system. And people say to me, have you done it? And I say it took years and years and years, and consistency and multiple touch points, and building social and building content and building blogging and vlogging and podcasting and building authority and participating in just nonstop. But while you're doing that, being consistent in your values and your service, and consistent in your messaging in terms of kind of who you are and what you do. And it's taken like 15 years, and I think it's really finally starting to buzz. And sometimes I get concerned when I meet early stage entrepreneurs who think one piece of it is going to solve it.
100%.
I met a woman, I'm not going to say her name. It broke my heart. She had, the lender who did this should be shot, okay? But they lent her $500,000 to start a consulting agency, be consulting agents. And she pissed through the money in 15 months. Okay. And then she was going, her revenue was like 100 grand a year. And then she was going to go ahead and borrow at 80% APR.
How much?
80.
80.
80.
Well, I mean, is that like a loan? Is that like a traditional loan shark or something?
Yeah.
I mean,
to hire a cold calling service. Okay. Who are going to magically break through her sales problem because now she felt that the former marketing she was doing wasn't working. And now this was going to be her magic bullet. And I actually convinced her not to do that.
Yeah.
And that she needed to go get a day job and then regroup and rebuild her life and figure out how to pay her debt off and then rebuild her company over time or at night and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But is it fair to say, Richard, that what you say is that it's a broad suite of things that you need to do, and you need to do it consistently and over time for it to work and build traction?
100%. So you've said a few things that I find extremely interesting. So the first thing is the magic bullet. That there is no magic bullet. And, you know, it just astonishes me in today's age that people still think that there is just one solution that is going to work, particularly in B2B. So I believe that there should be, the sweet spot is 6. You said a suite of activities. I think there should be 6. And I'll explain why. How many times can you send an email saying, hey, did you get my last email? How many times can you send an email saying, hey, would you like to come to my webinar? Before it gets really irritating.
It doesn't take long.
It doesn't take long, right? So if you think about, you know what, I really like using the analogy of dating when it comes to B2B. And, you know, I was telling someone the other day, think about it. If you go for a good date and it's a good date, you know, you meet, you have coffee, you get on. And then the next day you go to the same coffee shop, and the next day and the next day and the next day. However you get on, however well you get on, you're going to get bored. And you're like, is this person seriously, all they want to do is go to the coffee shop? You need to mix it up. You've got to keep it interesting. So, you know, in B2B, and let's say, you know, generally in B2B, you've got, certainly for our clients, slightly more, you know, longer sales cycles, 3 to 6 months. Sometimes we've got clients with 9 months to 24 months. You've got to come up with excuses to engage. You've got to come up with reasons to keep in contact that aren't annoying. And that's why you need that suite, as you said. So you need to be thinking about, how do you add value? How do you prove expertise? How do you get that external validation? So you could have a podcast, a webinar, a summit. You could meet someone in person at a conference or an association, but you've got to have reasons to engage and bump into people without being annoying. And without, you know, the worst case of all is trying to connect and sell to people straight away while they're still at the top of the funnel. You've got to have patience. You've got to have those multiple touch points. And I really believe in adding value as well. And I believe selling is much more about putting yourself forward as a partner rather than a supplier. And actually, I wrote a post recently on LinkedIn called Time for the New ABC. You remember in sales, the old traditional ABC, always be closing? I hate it. And I've been thinking a lot about the history of sales and where ABC comes from. And I think it came from a time that the seller had all the information. So if you went to a car dealership 30 years ago and you didn't know anything about cars, you're kind of stuff, right?
Right.
You go to a car dealer today, you've got as much information as a dealer, if not more, because all you do is chat GPT, bam, you're ready to go. So it's very, very different now. You know, you're kind of always on an equal level. So I'm a very big believer in, you know, you've got those suite of activities that you've said that position you as a trusted partner, as someone who's going to help people not only solve their problems, but help them uncover problems they didn't even know. And I'm very passionate about this form of selling. In fact, there's a wonderful case study about, you know, the candy Mentos. They I think it was a couple of years ago, they got their sales force to start recommending, to start collecting research and recommending to mom and pop stores all around the United States about which candies they should have in place instead of sometimes even their own. And what actually happened is that the Mentos salespeople actually started getting phone calls. Can you imagine that? Salespeople getting phone calls. They used to be the most annoying people ever because they go and, you know, in these shops, you've got people coming in all the time. You should stop this, you should stop that. And because they adopted more of a partner model, they started getting phone calls from these mom and pop shops saying, can you give us more advice on what we should stock and how it should work? So yeah, I'm very passionate about selling. I think the world is changing. I think people need to adopt a much more collaborative approach to selling. Multi-touch point is incredibly useful, but it's how the suite of how you engage is as important as how often. Yeah.
It's interesting. When I started, I think 6 months or a year after we started, we redid our first crappy website to our second crappy website. And the designer or brander helped us, insisted we have a blog on it.
Yeah.
And I convinced a buddy of mine who was a blogger to write the first 5 blog posts for me. Okay. And so we launched with the 5 blog posts. And then he said to me, I'm done. I don't want to blog for you anymore. I'm like, you mother. Like, like now I got a goddamn blog and I got blog posts on there. And who the hell is going to do the blogging? Okay, I don't have time for this. And I started blogging. And that was perhaps the best thing, one of the best things that ever happened to me as I figured out how to build the brand for the company. Because it started getting me, teaching me that I had to start communicating in little nuggets, lessons and nuggets. About now I have a daily blog that gets read by God knows how many people every day. But it was super. It's a super interesting thing, and when sometimes people are trying to push themselves into some kind of B2B space and build expertise, and they're not sure where to start, what I suggest to them is start a blog. And whether you do it on LinkedIn, and then share your posts on LinkedIn and different places and start just building your authority and expertise and committing to posting once, twice, 3 times a week, whatever it is, and trying to stay consistent with it. And it's interesting. So.
So I like to talk. I'm comfortable on stage. I like to talk a lot, so I'm obviously in a good career. My wife and my kids tell me that, you know, that I found the perfect, you know, job because, you know, actually people will pay to listen to me and everyone else in my family is trying to ignore me. But I don't like to write. And a year ago, my brother, who's also my business partner, said, you've actually really got to start writing. You've got to start putting stuff onto LinkedIn. And I was very resistant. And I think it's just, I'm very resistant to social media generally. But I did because I thought it would be good for business. But what I found so useful was sitting down with a pen and paper to collect your thoughts and to think about something useful is
Correct.
is not something we actually do that often as entrepreneurs. And goodness me, if you're putting a thought out to the world, certainly I spend a lot of time thinking about that, and it's improved my talks that I give. It's made me think deeply about what we do and how we make it better. I think it's one of the most valuable exercises we can do. By the way, Paul Graham from Y Combinator, I'm sure you've heard of him. So he just produced his latest essay was on writing, and he predicts that in the next 20 years, basically writing's dying out, and he thinks there'll be those who write and those who don't. And he was, he was talking about very much like we're talking about now, about how important it is to clarify one's thoughts and to improve one's way of thinking. And that he doesn't believe there's any better way than sitting down and actually writing. So there's so much value to be had in that.
And it's amazing to me how I can smell it, something written by ChatGPT
100%.
30 seconds away, and so much of that crap is all over LinkedIn now. It almost makes me disgusted. But and it's pretty funny. Like I write every 2 weeks for this friend of mine. His newsletter is called 21 Hats, and he's a great editor. He was my former editor at the New York Times, and he's really has my number. And there have been like twice in the last 2-3 years where I've just been exhausted, and I've tried to use ChatGPT to cheat, and he catches me every time.
Why do you think that is? Because it's true, isn't it? You can spot it. What is it?
You can just smell it. It doesn't feel like it was written by a human.
Yeah.
And it wasn't.
No, it wasn't. And by the way, I think this is I can only see things like what we're doing now becoming more and more popular, because we get fed. And one, we can spot it a mile off, but two, it's all going to start reading the same. Right. It's going to be very, very hard. And I think more and more people are just going to gravitate to podcasts, short form podcasts, getting information this way, or reading transcripts of it, because at least, well, hopefully, unless you're a very clever AI bot, I'm talking right now to another human being. And, I think I'm assuming this will last at least a few years, right, before we get replaced. I mean, maybe one day I can send my avatar to come and chat to you, but I think that's a way off.
Yeah, it's super interesting for me in this micro content stuff. Like I started in COVID, and now I have this daily blog called AmiSights, and it's a blog a day. And my goal is I got to get a nugget of an idea out in 30-second read or less.
Oh,
and that's really if it takes longer than 30 seconds to read it, it's too long. Okay. And
every day,
Monday through Friday. Now we'll cheat a little bit. Like on Tuesdays, the podcast summary comes out, and sometimes I pick an article that someone summarized, like that I find interesting, and someone will help me write a quick summary of that article. But usually 2 or 3 a week, or just it's going to be a nugget of idea. Or sometimes I'll do a really quick video, also 30 seconds. But my favorite speeches to give, Richard, which are also really difficult. In some ways, it's much harder to give a 7-minute talk or a 10-minute talk than an hour talk, because you've got to if you've really got to provide value engage and teach them something in 7 minutes, it's really interesting. To me, that's in some ways more fun than speaking for an hour.
Yes, I haven't done that challenge yet. A good friend of mine at EO just did a TED Talk for the first time. So she's on the EO speaking circuit. And what was she given? I think she was given 12 minutes for a TED Talk. I think it's 12 or 13 minutes. I can't remember. And she said it was insanely hard to get a valuable idea down into that amount of time.
Correct. I love it. To me, that's the best.
Yeah. So of course now I'm thinking I've got to do it, but yeah, that's challenging. And I like the fact that you use the word nuggets, because So my talk is called the 50 Nuggets of B2B Sales. And I like nugget. For me, a nugget is something that someone can take away and use and implement into their life that is going to have an immediate impact. Is that what you mean by a nugget?
Yeah, it's just a little nugget of an idea.
Yeah. And because I think there's so much stuff out there. There's so much wisdom that we can almost become lost in it and go down rabbit holes, and then we end up doing nothing with it. And I think, it's the curse of the world that we live in. It, the issue that we live in today isn't lack of wisdom. I mean, you can get anything from anyone at any time. It's actually finding stuff that you can use and that's going to be, extremely useful to you and actionable. And that's also hard, isn't it? If we're talking about, giving out information that's going to be useful, it's also getting an idea across in 7 minutes, but giving something that is easy for people to implement, that's also really, really hard as well. And I find that a lot, in sales, it's because some of the ideas are quite complex, particularly in B2B sales, but, giving people value, which I believe in passionately. I'm part of a summit tomorrow. And I've actually got a 20-minute talk. So normally, by the way, normally my talk's an hour. So tomorrow I've been given 20 minutes.
Got a better practice.
Oh, I've been practicing nonstop, and I think it's pretty good.
Yeah.
But I also want to make sure that someone can just take away something that they can implement that's going to help their business. That's really important for me.
So what's the main point you're going to share tomorrow in 20 minutes? Give me your cliff note of it.
So the main point is, so it's all about the different stages of B2B sales funnel. So the way I look at it, there's top funnel, middle funnel, bottom. So top is, how you connect with people, how you build awareness, how you build friendship. So that's kind of top. And that's a whole kind of 20-minute talk in itself, but I'm going to park that for the moment because I think, I think hopefully people get by now that connecting with someone on LinkedIn and then trying to sell them something doesn't really work. And then actually you need to spend more time building that relationship. But it's the second, and then the bottom of the funnel is what I call kind of opportunity conversion and management. That's kind of typical kind of sales tactics and techniques. And again, I know that inside out. I've talked about it a lot. Where I find that most people get stuck is the middle of the funnel. And it's like, well, I've got this relationship with someone. They're not ready to buy yet. I don't even know if they are ready to buy, but they fit my idea of a perfect customer. How do I keep in contact with them? How do I prove that, I'm a good person to do business with? How do I make sure that I stay front of mind without being annoying? That's what I'm really interested in. And we touched upon it earlier. That for me is where you need that suite of activities. And that's where you need to position yourself as a partner rather than as a supplier. So that's what I'll be talking about.
And I guess just remember, Rome was not built in a day, friends.
Yeah. I mean, it drives me mad when you see all these sales tech products saying shorten your sales cycle by using this tech or this app or whatever. And it's, okay, fine. If you're selling tennis balls online, who cares? But if you're selling something remotely complex or expensive, it's hard to shorten a sales cycle, and it does take time. We're human beings, and just our human nature is that we like dating, like in relationships, the best ones take time, take investment. And it shouldn't be rushed. Otherwise you risk putting the other person off. I think, when you say it takes time, for me, that means if you go in too early, too hard, you're potentially going to lose that sale. And it's very, very hard to come back. But if you're too aggressive too early on.
maybe it's one way for people to think about it is if you sell people like you would want to be sold to.
Yeah. Yeah.
It'll work. If you're too pushy or too aggressive in your sales strategy, you risk pissing people off. And that's
I mean,
really
do you know anyone who likes being hard sold to?
But when you're tight for cash or you're struggling or you desperately trying to prove a model, it's really, really hard to be patient. And you've like, it took us in our first year 11 months before we made one sale.
Yeah. Yeah. It does. And I mean, that's why, the companies that are lucky enough to go out and raise money, which I've never done. I've always bootstrapped. This is my 5th company. But raising that money does allow you to be more patient. And I, for me, that's probably that's the main reason to raise money, is that you can stay committed to your original vision of who you want to target and why, rather than suddenly trying to run around getting money from any source and then diluting what your original vision was. Which is also what we all do when we're bootstrapping, right? You'll take money from anywhere to get yourself off the ground generally. And then by the way, this leads me into something else that I find fascinating. We deal with all the time. If you're bootstrapping, what tends to happen, in my opinion, is you start off with a good idea of who your ideal customer is. And then 5 years later, because you're taking money from anyone and everyone, you've got 10 ideal customers. And then it's really hard to scale because your operational processes might be different for 5 different customer types. Your sales processes might be different. And then you're jack of all trades. And then you're kind of just joining, the massive companies that seem to will do anything for everybody. It's rare, isn't it, to come across those companies that have a very unique positioning. We do this for these people. And I love coming across companies that do that because I feel they've stayed the course. Or they've grown and then cut back to remain really, really focused.
Absolutely. Richard, how do people find you if they want you?
Well, as I said, I'm now on LinkedIn. Yeah, Richard Walton, Outsell, put it into Google. I'll come up on LinkedIn. And our website is Outsell Sales. But LinkedIn is the best spot. You can connect with me there. We can chat. I post what I hope is very useful content a couple times a week. So yeah, that would be the best place.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with us, and thank you for all you've done for the Grit Group. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
And I know the EO members do as well in there. And one day I'll come back to Cape Town and we'll hang out.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to chatting.
Well, Richard. Hope to see you in person one day soon. Take care, man. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Cool.